You want to put it on YouTube?
Oh, yeah.
Right. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and here we go. We are in Surah Nisa still, and yesterday we were discussing this ayah, فَلْيُغَيِّرُنَّ خَلْقَ اللَّهِ. We went in details. We're not going to continue in that. And of course, يَعِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. We went in and talked about that before, even yesterday. In other words, يَعِدُهُمْ, and where this is basically referring to the promises that shaitan would promise the people, in where this would give you a better security, that this would basically give you a better hope in life, that this would basically give you a better future. So this is وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا, when shaitan is really giving them promises that are the word غُرُورًا. I want you to look at the word غُرُورًا, because غُرُور is when you would think that the reality of something is in a certain way, when the truth of the matter and what is actually covered underneath is completely different than what you had thought. And this is al-ghurur. Al-ghurur can mean pride, can mean arrogance. It could also mean a type of self-manipulation. And that's why even when you look at ghurur, in where a person is self-manipulating themselves, thinking that they are above everyone else, but the truth of the matter is that they're not above everyone else. So that ghurur is a self-manipulation, and certainly a self-manipulation is basically to reflect that you did not see the realities of things and that you lived with the wrong image, right? This is غرورا. أولئك مأواهم جهنم. Those are the people that their ending would basically be the word ma'wa. We talked about ma'wa and that it is different than the word masir. We said masir would, the word masir would more be related to time, versus il-ma'wa is more related to place. All right. So when we speak about masir, we're speaking about that person is basically going into a destination that they themselves will basically be in, they themselves will be, of course, regretting and in remorse for the choices that they had done to lead to such a consequence. Versus al-ma'wa is basically talking about the place itself, all right? Talking about the place itself. Where is this really going? This place, where is it? المأوى, where is it, what is it going to be looking like? And that's why you would actually have hold on, let me just get this one. That's why you would have it connected مأواهم جهنم ولا يجدون عنها محيصا. So they're basically, their destination is going to be Jahannam and ولا يجدون. And the reason why it said ولا يجدون, they don't find and they can't find, is really because when shaitan was promising them all those promises, it was really in order to find, they're in search of something, they were in basically in hopes of something. And certainly now what they're finding themselves in is really nothing but a consequence that they absolutely did not expect. In other words, there's a difference between a self-manipulation into thinking that you're going to expect success, you're going to expect success in this life and the hereafter, or that you're going to expect some form of happiness, some form of health, some form of course, wealth, etc., because that's part of your survival. That's basically what you're in search for as a human being. It is basically part of your instinct that you are seeking a better means of survival in this life, and certainly better means of survival to avoid, of course, death, to avoid elimination. And of course, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, what they're really going to be finding is not what they had expected, but they're going to be finding simply Jahannam, and and therefore they cannot run away from it. It's a consequence that is inevitable, basically, an inevitable consequence for basically a behavior and a choice that they had invested. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And of course, always in the Quran, whenever it talks about Jahannam, and it would basically later talk about Jannah as well. So it won't leave you into just living in the fear, but also laying out hope as well. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَنُدْخِلُهُم جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ. And those that had believed, and the word عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَات, عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَات basically had done good. And when we look at the word good, and we mentioned before that is it an inclusive al, or is it, which basically inclusive al would mean al-istighraqiyya, or is it a particular al-ahdiyya? So it can actually be both, in where as-salihat, they're basically defined and determined by the Lord Almighty. That's what makes something as ethical. In other words, the one to define something being just or something being ethical is really none other but the Lord Almighty Himself. At the same time, عَمِلُ الصَّالِحَات, in where it is in various areas of good. It's not one area of good. So it's not enough to actually say, well, I donate to Africa, or I donate to this. There are certain areas of good that you have to complete. You have to basically practice, and you cannot consider that I have done this area of good, therefore the other area I do not have to do. That's why it came in plural. I want to look at this plural piece of it, because it's not enough to do one particular salih action or one particular pious action, but you actually have to do it in various ends. And speaking about various ends, when we look at the various ends, of course, various ends would basically mean every single good deed has the influence and has the impact to bring about a particular good behavior or a particular, of course, outcome. And the same thing when you
And
look at
that's kind of like the opposite of like when you do the bad
well,
deed, right?
absolutely, which is why,
Subhanallah.
right. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says right there, مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَأْ بِهِ. When you look at that one, and where even when you're doing an evil action, if you're doing something that is evil, the response and what that will basically trace and bring about is really something of that same sort. And that's why yujza bihi to mean from the same sort, from the same type. And that's why in fiqh we would basically say that the punishment is supposed to be al-jaza'u min jins al-amal. This is what we would say, al-jaza'u min jins al-amal. What does that mean? So when you look at al-jaza'u, let me write it down. Al-jaza'u min jins al-amal. Al-jaza'u min jins al-amal actually means that the reward is going to be from the same nature of the action. So the same nature of action is really what you're going to be getting in response. Whether we're speaking about al-jaza', meaning a good reward or good behavior is going to bring in a good outcome, or whether an evil behavior is going to bring basically something else evil that is evil from the same nature of what you had actually done. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there basically tells you عَمِلُ الصَّالِحَات, the same salih behavior is going to سَنُدْخِلُهُم. سَنُدْخِلُهُم, this scene right there is basically speaking about the future, is basically speaking about to be affirmative of something. So sanudkhilum, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is affirming that in the future He will be the one to let them enter. When you look at nudkhiluhum, is different than adkhalahum, or it is different in compared to other conjugations basically. So sanudkhiluhum basically tells that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So why did it actually come in plural? Why is it that we will get them to enter, or we will enter them in paradise? Why we and not I? Does that mean that Allah is plural? Absolutely not. This form of plural in Arabic is actually to show magnificence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. So how is it that he is one, but then the words are using a plural sense? It would use a plural sense because in Lugha Arabiya, the plural sense can also be to reflect glorification, to reflect magnificence. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is plural. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, but this is basically a literary system in لغة عربية. سندخلهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا. That the Lord Almighty would basically let them enter a paradise. تجري. The word تجري actually means to run or to flow. What's flowing underneath? Basically different rivers. So why rivers are flowing underneath? Of course, when we're speaking about water, water basically brings in greenery, water brings in a number of different things in our own body that basically would reflect in comfort. So does that mean the sound? Does that mean the smell? What does that really mean? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let you all enter Jannah to really, I guess, bring me a better explanation why there is a focus on water. There's a focus on water, not because the Arabian area, the Arabian Peninsula was desert, so they were really in search of water, but of course, because water itself is actually the main thing to bring all the delight, all the different jinan. All right. So what does that mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't create a Jannah without having water. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of creating that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling you of what is also part of your instinct. It is part of your instinct that you want and in that you basically sense some form of comfort by having more things of nature around you. So whether we're speaking about water, rivers, mountains, birds, all of these different things, you relate to them as a way of comfort. And that's why it's really interesting how right now we're seeing I guess a trend in where people, because of the pressure of this I guess the buildings and all of that, it's really blocking our view from relating to the different things in nature, relating to the world around us, and we're becoming, I guess, isolating ourselves between these walls, and without us realizing we're distancing ourselves away from our organic nature. And this is extremely important. In other words, if you really want to go on trips, and let's call it religious trips, spiritual trips, where you need to go to is really more of nature. The more you relate to the different things in nature, the more you're capable of getting stronger and getting stronger to your organic self. وَعْدَ اللَّهِ حَقًّا. That is basically a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَصْدَقُ مِنَ اللَّهِ قِيلًا. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no one that is more honest and more, of course, reflecting words of honesty, reflecting words of truth than the Lord Almighty. ليس بأمانيكم ولا أماني أهل الكتاب. Now, we didn't do this ayah before. Let me first give it the translation, a surface translation. ليس بأمانيكم, not based on your hopes and not the hopes of the people of the book. من يعمل سوءا يجزى به. Whoever does wrong, they will be held accountable for what they had committed, or they will be punished based on that. And they would not find from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wali, an authority, or a place of victory. A couple of things to say here. I want to take you to this ayah in where when you look at, I want you to look at this ayah in where ليس بأمانيكم ولا أماني. Where is it? Okay, here we go. So the ليس بأمانيكم ولا أماني أهل الكتاب. Let's look at this. So, what was the reason behind the revelation for that ayah? I mean, it went from going through speaking in response to the people, of course, whether the munafiqeen or whether in response, we definitely found in where the words were going towards one direction, and then of course went into exposing shaitan and his methods, and then it went into, well, it's not by your hopes, not by the hopes of the people of the book, and then took us into a completely different corner. So what really happened? Let's talk about this. It was narrated that upon Ibn Abbas that the Jews and the Christians, they basically had said the ones to enter Jannah are only the ones that are from us. The people of Quraysh, on the other hand, they said, well, we're not even going to get resurrected. This is all a myth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically revealed the ayah, لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيِّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. In other words, you don't dictate, and it's not based on what you want to believe and what you would want to claim. It's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you look at this one, right there in, of course, in the Quran, you don't see any punctuation. But this one right there, so لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيِّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ, period, or at least semicolon. Now it's after denying their claim, then now it wants to object to it and actually say, well, the truth of the matter is that whoever does su'an, I want you to look at the word su'an, because the word su', it didn't say مَن يَعْمَلِ السُّوءَ. It didn't say it was a particular type of su'. It generalized, and it basically went into a state of an undefined su', an undefined evil, in where it let it be a comprehensive word and said whoever does evil behavior. And it didn't say a particular evil behavior. It just generalized and said yujza bihi. In other words, when you look at the word yujza bihi, is it yujza bihi to mean whatever evil thing that they had done, they would basically get the punishment in hellfire? Or is it that whatever evil thing that they had done, it basically from the same type and from the same trace, in other words, from the same nature, that's what's basically going to bring in? And of course, both both interpretations can actually be true to the sentence right here. مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ, in where you do an action, you'll be basically punished in hellfire. And also, or that, let's say you steal something, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let the punishment be for stealing basically your hand, to be responsible for that behavior. Therefore, that's what is basically going to be the location for the punishment. You basically kill somebody, well, the punishment, the same nature that you killed somebody, the same nature of killing somebody, basically you're going to be held accountable using the same nature of basically killing somebody. You're going to then pay the price and have your life be the price. And same thing in where, when we're speaking about yujza bihi, in where maybe it's a clearer thing to see and to spot when we're speaking about, yes, your hand stealing, your hand basically getting the punishment, your life, you killed somebody, your life is basically at stake, and the price here, it's easier to see those areas, and easy to see, I guess, the standard and the paradigm here. But when you continue on, what you may not recognize is the same thing, in where you might actually bully somebody, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will one day, from the same type of and the same nature of you bullying, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually send someone not necessarily to bully you, but to humiliate you, or send someone basically where you will need them. And then therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might actually, from the same trace of the nature of your behavior, actually send something in that response. So same thing when you're talking about, for example, that you had exposed, let's say, your body, Well, the same nature of you exposing your body, you're going to find yourself really paying the price of probably you getting humiliated or probably molested or probably others abusing you physically or giving you certain, um, of course, ways and looks of dishonor and so forth. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, in the ayah in Surah Al-Ahzab, was basically explaining that the reason for hijab was really ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين, related that the reason for hijab so that they would be known. Well, that they would be known when, how is it that they would be known when what it really is doing is eliminating the person's identity? No, it's actually exposing another identity. It's not eliminating that identity. It's basically exposing an identity. And that's why it said ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن, so that they would basically be known for their identity of their Islam, their identity to value, basically values beyond pleasure, beyond, of course, attraction, because it's part of a woman's nature that she definitely enjoys it when people would comment on her appearance, comment on, of course, her her beauty, etc. And of course, by eliminating that, you're basically saying, well, my power is basically in my identity. That's what I consider as my most valuable place. It's my identity, and therefore, this is my red line. My identity is my red line. This is what I value most. So you would recognize that I'm not a place of flirtation. I'm not a place where I would basically give you the space for you to basically trespass a certain boundary, because the boundary that basically I value most is seen on me, in where it's my hijab, it's the principle of Allah Almighty. So therefore, you would recognize that. Of course, right now you could see a lot of the feminists will say, well, no, men are supposed to be educated about how to keep distance without putting more and more clothes on women, etc. There's a certain reality in men, a certain reality in women, a certain reality in nature. You cannot fight nature and fight Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and fight instincts, and without you realizing you're actually going against reality. You are then creating a self-manipulation, and that's what ghurur is. So there we go. This is يعدهم ويمنيهم وما يعدهم الشيطان إلا غرورا. It's basically all shaitan manipulating people, and this manipulation is what will actually lead to a wrong narrative, a wrong explanation, and certainly a wrong consequence as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَيْسَ بِأَمَنِيكُمْ. It's not an issue of what you would hope the narrative would be, or what you would hope the consequence would be, or what you would hope the truth would be, and certainly not the people of the book either. The truth of the matter is that whatever good that you would do or whatever evil that you would do would basically bring about the same trace of punishment, the same trace of consequence from within that nature. And of course, the reason why most people would basically engage in the wrong action is really because they would think that that was going to be bringing in some hope of a better survival, some hope of a better successful life, some hope of a better future, and the list goes on and on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells you right there again, وَلَا يَجِدُ, exactly right there, وَلَا يَجِدُونَ. So this one was in plural, and this one was...
is that kind of an explanation why some of the scholars said they felt like they were living in Jannah in the dunya? I mean, for the positive part?
Absolutely, because when you basically engage in good, you're going to find, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that for الذين آمنوا لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They would not find fear, and they would not be in sorrow. And of course, this is not just in akhirah, but this is in dunya as well. Even though there could be fear, but the fear that they're living, there's natural fear and there's the other fear. The fear that they're not living in is the fear of trying to combine for their survival, trying to accumulate different dunya things for their survival. They recognize that the true savior, they recognize that the true wali, that the true authority is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you look at that la khawfun alayhim, in where they are living al-izzah, they're living in honor. Because what fear brings is really a pressure for you to give up on your principles. And that's why four main things that must be, four main akhlaq, they must be in every single Muslim. Number one, recognizing justice. Let's write it down. We mentioned this one before, but let's write it down. Number one is, where's my cursor? Oh, here it is. Number one is recognizing justice. Number one, recognizing justice, al-adl basically, here we go. And recognizing justice. Number two is basically developing patience. Number three is basically al-iffa and satisfaction. Satisfaction. Okay, faction. Okay. And number five is basically having, number four is basically having courage. So when you're looking at satisfaction, you're talking about iffa, you're talking about sabr, you're talking about courage, you're talking about shaja'a. There's no way that you can be a Muslim unless you actually were tested in each and every single one of these. And that's basically what brings in لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. I want you to look at this one. لا خوف عليهم. Why? Well, they do recognize justice. They do recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-wali. They do recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the actual force in this world. And therefore, He had dictated that whenever somebody does good or somebody does wrong, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to dictate the ending, the consequence, the result of where this is leading them. Therefore, they recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their place of wilayah, their place of authority. Number two, patience. But of course, when we say la khawfun alayhim, what we really, it's part of our nature that what we're trying to eliminate is more pain. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you recognize that, hey, by embracing Islam, you can actually be subjecting yourself to more pain. So how is it that I'm embracing Islam to eliminate pain, but I'm bringing in pain? Let's give an example. For when we're speaking about hijab, for example, okay, I'm trying to here eliminate pain, and yet I'm here adding more heat on myself. I'm making myself basically warmer in a very humid, hot climate, and I'm wearing hijab in order to eliminate pain. How is that even making sense? That's supposed to be the opposite. You basically are supposed to get yourself happier, not the other way around. So when you look at this right there, this little category, all right? So when we speak about eliminating pain, we're actually speaking about eliminating larger pain. We're speaking about long-term pain. We're also speaking about long-term, harder pain. So that's why we would embrace a value to avoid the pain in the long run and the bigger pain. I want you to look at this one, the bigger pain. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah al-Insan was basically exposing a lot of the people that don't embrace the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's actually go to remember this is 107. We're going to go to Surah al-Insan and actually see what we're talking about right there, because this is extremely important. Let's look at Surah al-Insan right there. All right, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes us into I guess that area of how we understand the whole world around us, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells you, فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ وَلَا تُطِعْ مِنْهُمْ آثِمًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. Here we go. Let's see the Surah Al-Insan. right there. Okay, here we go. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. There is, you're going to be patient for the rule of your Lord Almighty, and do not obey those that are embracing sin or those that are embracing basically other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to get yourself stronger, what you're embracing is remembrance of the Lord Almighty throughout the night and the day, because that's the value, that's the center that you value most. And in order to help you grow stronger throughout the night, make sujood, because that will enhance your spirituality in order to get you stronger in enduring the patience for one, itta'ah, for obedience, the patience for, of course, basically leaving what is haram, and the patience for the different calamities that you might be facing. So when you look at الصبر على الطاعة, الصبر على المعصية, الصبر عن المعصية, and الصبر عن, or sabr basically for the different calamities, and basically الصبر in having the patience during that time frame when you're trying to stay steadfast. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, when you look at patience to explain how is it that I'm putting myself in some struggle to eliminate a struggle. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ يُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةَ. These people, what they're really trying to rush is really al-ajila. They're trying to rush a pleasure, exactly like a person that might actually get into some intoxications. They are trying to rush a pleasure. They will get some pleasure by taking, probably drinking, by probably taking some certain drugs, etc. But what they're leaving behind, يَذَرُونَ وَرَاءَهُمْ يَوْمًا ثَقِيلًا. On Judgment Day, they're leaving behind a day that is loaded with different accountabilities, a day that is very heavy on each and every single person. And that's the same thing when we're talking about somebody that probably is rushing al-ajila, they're rushing a certain type of a pleasure. And what that will bring from its own nature is that it's not going to bring in pleasure later on in the long term, but it's actually going to be bringing in more and more suffering. So many times we may commit a certain suffering in order to eliminate a longer period of suffering and eliminate certainly a consequence of more pain. That's the same thing when we're talking about each and every single thing that we do in life. Isn't it a form of suffering to actually go and study and work on your degree and all of that, and trying to get all of all of that studying, and you're avoiding friends, you're probably avoiding many fun times, you're avoiding so many things. Well, that's because you recognize that those 4 years are going to make your next 40 and 50 years easier. And that's the same thing for each and every single thing. You might actually eat healthy foods. Basically, if you eat healthy foods, that's basically going to, it's not the sweetest, it's not the funnest thing to eat, but it's basically going to make down the road that your life basically continue healthier, continue longer, continue, of course, in a better expectations, a better consequence. It's the same thing. On the other hand, you could eat right now, you could decide not to eat your food, healthy food, and later on, you might actually, just like Stephen Jobs, he basically was telling you, you can decide to eat healthy foods now, and that would basically be your diet that you're choosing, and being selective on what you choose to eat, or you will basically find yourself actually eating your medications as a treat, or as and taking your medications as food. So you need to, you need to choose your battles. And that's the same thing. It's an issue of choosing your battles. So when you look at patience, it's basically inevitable that yes, you may have to basically embrace certain behaviors to eliminate a later consequence. So that's why you embrace the patience in basically practicing the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to eliminate a farther consequence. And of course, satisfaction, because you will be exposed to many different things that might actually seem very attractive, and without you realizing, your risk or what you may need to jeopardize is really your faith. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you right there, you have to have courage. So you have no choice but to have it, but to have that courage, because for the kuffar, they will basically continue. They'll have the courage to basically stand against the audacity, at least the audacity to stand against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, if they are not connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't have the recognition for justice. They don't have the patience. They don't have the satisfaction. They don't have the courage to basically practice the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They'll basically end up not having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their wali. And we said wali includes one, the decision, the one to give you decision, the place, basically the center of authority, and number three, the center for victory. So right there, the word nasira is to emphasize the word al-wilay, because al-wali contains within it nasir, contains within it victory. So many times in Lugha Arabiya, we can say a word that may seem that it's an additional word, but it's really affirming one piece of what the word contains. So here, min dunillahi waliyan, it already includes one, the center or authority, two, the place of decision making, three, victory, but then here emphasized on victory in order that we would not skip that recognition, in where if the person leaves basically the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they had then basically led themselves to one inevitable, of course, consequence, which is they will not find a center that will give them stability. Two, they will not find a place in a basically a safe place or a safe reference for the right decision making. Three, they will not find victory and success. It will be nothing but a self-delusion, self-manipulation. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically right there pointing that nasira, in where it is part of your nature. You're searching for a better future. You're searching for someone to guide you to basically getting into those successes, and certainly wanting to search and get to success. So Allah
That's just so amazing, because subhanallah, like when you read the translation, you don't see how the ayat are like connected, subhanallah, but with Arabic, like you can see that, subhanallah.
Right, so that's why the ayah right there continues to affirm. Right there, it's like, okay, so I talked to you about ma ya'mal su'an, and the word su is basically wrong behavior. But remember, the Quran won't just tell you about the consequences of wrong behavior, but will also, just like he would tell you about Jannah, he will tell you hellfire. He would also tell you the wrong path and the right path, and what that's going to lead to. So let's see, when he talked about the wrong path, he said, well, it's going to actually trace some evil consequences, and you choose your battle. On the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, مَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ, if anybody is to do salihat. On the other hand, if a person is to do the good behavior, to do what is right, then in that situation, min dhakarin aw untha, whether it was male or female. In other words, it wasn't going to be based on a person's sex or a person's tribe or a person's status in this world, because it's all, number one, they have their center, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa huwa mu'min. Then the consequence is فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ, then those are the people that will enter Jannah. Those are the people that will basically lead, and that will basically get into finding themselves entering Jannah, and they will not وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ نَقِيرًا, and they will not be oppressed, not even in naqir. I want you to look at in naqir right there. I'm going to get to I want you to see that word naqir, because yes, this is not talking about, just the in naqir. I want you to look at it right there. Okay. Here's in naqir. So this is in naqir right there, this little tiny, I don't know, tiny circle right there. This is al-fatil, and this is al-qitmir. And of course, in the Quran, it uses this quite frequently. So this is, of course, the seed of a date. Okay, this is a date seed. All right. Now, the Quran uses this frequently, not necessarily because it's taken you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not, I guess, dismiss not even this amount or this amount or this amount, but this is a metaphor in order to let you know that if it is something that people usually don't recognize, people usually dismiss and regard as nothing that they would make use of, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not dismiss, no matter how small, no matter how unrecognized that good action is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not dismiss any good action, no matter how small, no matter how unrecognizable people might not recognize or unrecognizable that good behavior is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not dismiss it. So when you look at وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not dismiss, would not disregard, not even the smallest amount of what a good deed might have been in the eyes of many, might be something dismissed, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not dismiss it. So how do we actually get there? وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, look at the coherence here. How do we get there? How do we get to Jannah? How do we actually stay mu'mineen? How do we get to basically being able to يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ, do مِنَ الصَّالِحَات? Now here's one thing. Notice here, مَا يَعْمَلْ, it didn't say مِن سُوءٍ, but here it said مِنَ الصَّالِحَات. What's the difference? Here it said whoever does evil. In other words, it didn't say from evil, or at least a partition, but it actually said whoever does evil. In other words, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes the person, it's not because of one evil thing that they had done, but an evil action drives another evil action, and another evil action drives another evil action. And it isn't until مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا they will find themselves embracing many paths of evil action. It becomes a consistent thing without them realizing. It becomes like a rolling snowball, in where you thought, oh, I just didn't, for example, I didn't do my salah. You didn't do your salah, then that's going to actually lead you into another type of evil momentum without you realizing. Basically, it acts as a momentum that starts rolling you elsewhere, and it becomes this type of lifestyle that will basically end you in a completely set, consistent lifestyle where there's nothing but su', there's nothing but wronghood. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, I want you to look at this ayah right there. وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ. Did it say وَمَن يَعْمَلِ الصَّالِحَاتِ or وَمَن يَعْمَلِ الصَّالِحَاتِ? It said وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ. What's the difference? So this is mina to actually mean from good. What does from good? And in English, this is actually broken English. Certainly, you can't do from good. All right, but I'm here trying to explain it in just a bit. So in Arabic, mina salihat actually means even if you were to do a piece of good. Okay, this is in order to go with the coherence. وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ نَقِيرًا. Even if you were to do a piece of good, you weren't necessarily completely all good. You weren't always consistent with everything good. You did, sometimes you would do a hasana here, sometimes you would help your mom there, sometimes you did some good deed there, but not always consistent with being good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He wanted to let you know that even if it is mina salihat, even if it is a part of good, even if it's just a small portion of good that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to dismiss it, no matter how small and unrecognizable. That's why he said mina salihat. What did it say? Mina min su'in. Now, what about man here? This is ism. This is different. This is man yamal. This is ism mawsul, basically whoever. Okay. Min is different than man. Man is different than min. Min right there actually means from, partition, basically. Man, this is whoever. Two different things. Whoever and basically ta'id, partition. Two different things. They might seem man and min, they basically have the same writing, but of course the kasra here is basically meaning a partition. All right. Woman ahsan dinna. So how do we actually get to is it enough to do a partial good? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, in order to explain, yes, a partial good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not dismiss it, but وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ. It's okay, you might have contributed good, but there's actually a better deen, a better commitment, better conviction in embracing the principle of the Lord Almighty. Deen is basically more comprehensive than just a principle, because that would mean aqidah, and that would mean sharia, that would mean tawheed, that would mean you're embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that would also mean you're embracing the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what deen is. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains there's no better deen. It's like, yes, you can do a good deed, but the highest level that you want to aim at is there's no better aim than actually submitting your face to the Lord Almighty, وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ, when they're actually practicing ihsan. We're going to talk about that. And they وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, and they followed the path of Ibrahim's millah, Ibrahim's basically the principle of Ibrahim, the revelation that was sent unto Ibrahim, Hanifa, away from all the different manipulations, away from all the different wrong paths, and straight to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken Ibrahim as Khalila. Wait a minute. Too many things to actually talk about here. Let's see. Man ahsanu din mimman aslama wajhahu, submitted their face. So does that mean sujood? No. Because the face, the word wajh in Lugha Arabiya, the face is basically the area where it contains all the most important, at least, organs that make you recognize this world. Your eyes, your smelling, your communication, your hearing. Those are the most important areas. They're basically in your head. They're basically in the top part of your own self. So in other words, when we speak about aslama wajhahu lillah, this is actually badal. And what that means is that this is not talking about the face, but this is actually talking about that you're submitting the most important organs, the most important areas that you learn about this world and you recognize this world through, you submit it to let it embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not embrace your own self. What is it embracing? It's embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not embracing your own pleasures. It's embracing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what does that mean? Well, it's explained in the hadith. I want you to look at this hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ in a hadith, in a hadith where I want you to look at this hadith. All right. This hadith is extremely important to explain this one. So this hadith, basically, let's look at it. Let's look at this hadith. Okay. I want you to see it because this is extreme. إن الله تعالى قال من عاد لي وليا فقد آذنته بالحرب وما تقرب إلي عبدي بشيء أحب إلي مما افترضته عليه ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه فإذا أحببته كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وبصره الذي يبصر به ويده التي يبطش بها ورجله التي يمشي بها ولئن سألني لأعطينه وإن استعاذني لأعيذنه. Could see this hadith is actually part of the 40 Nawawi. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Whoever goes, or at least is an enemy to any of my servants, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would wage a war at them. And how do these people become awliya in the beginning? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains everything that my servant, this is a hadith Qudsi, this is not the Prophet ﷺ saying, but this is the Prophet ﷺ basically in his word saying what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Whoever would get closer, any servant would get closer to me, but what I would favor most is really what I had obligated them to do. And every single time my servant gets closer to me with basically the voluntary good actions, then the Lord Almighty, they would get closer and closer till I would love them. And then if I would love them, I would become the hearing that they hear me through, and their sight, the sight that they would see through, and their hand that they would basically touch with, and their leg that they would walk with. And if they were to ask me, I would give them. And if they were to seek refuge in me, I would protect them. I want you to look at here. Nawawi explains, what does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically be the hearing? Isn't that a form of anthropomorphization? Isn't that a form of, we're basically saying, so we become God? What does that even mean? No. It basically means this wali becomes so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the only thing that they would use in their face, basically, in their body, in their extremities, and basically their own body, they would only use it to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So their hearing would only be used for recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why, yes, الَّذِي يَسْمَعُ بِهِ, meaning they would only listen to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as permissible. They would only see with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees, to mean that they would only see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had permitted that the person would see. So what happens is that they had fully embraced aslama wajhahu. So how do we understand the part about the yadahu? So in other words, whether they're touching something, whether they're walking to something, they would only embrace as only what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as righteous. So when we look at aslama wajhahu lillah, basically this is not to only mean the face, but this is to mean every single potential that you were granted, you use it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa huwa muhsin. But that, in order to be at the highest level, all right, this is stage one. They would do a piece of good thing, they'll enter Jannah, but there's a higher level, and that's the level of muhsin. The level of muhsin is basically, as mentioned in Hadith Jibreel. Hadith Jibreel, we know, maybe we could actually bring it up again right there for you to all see it. And where Hadith Jibreel alayhi salam was actually a known hadith. And this hadith in where Jibreel alayhi salam comes in the shape of a human being. Jibreel alayhi salam comes in the shape of a human being and sits with the Sahaba and amongst the Prophet ﷺ, along with the Sahaba. And what happens then is that Jibreel alayhi salam asks the question, and basically demonstrating right before the Sahaba, but demonstrating what Islam really means and what that basically, let's get that hadith right there. Hopefully it opens up with me right now. And let's see. I just opened up a page that has that hadith. Here we go. Let's remove that. All right, here we go. Here's the hadith. And where the hadith says, let's see, can you actually see what I'm doing? Yes. Okay, and where the hadith basically says right there, بينما نحن جلوس عند رسول الله. And one day while we were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, one day a man comes and he was completely dressed in very white clothes and had very black hair. We did not see the influence of travel on him, and none of us knew who he was. He sat right in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he put his knees right in front of the Prophet ﷺ's knees, and he put his palms on the Prophet ﷺ, or at least on his own thighs, and he said, "Oh Muhammad, tell me about Islam." The Prophet ﷺ responds, he said, "Islam is to bear witness that there is no God worthy of worship, and Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah, and you would perform salah, and you would basically give zakah, fast Ramadan, and you would perform the pilgrimage if you're capable of going there." But then the man said, "You're right." The Sahaba said, well, or at least Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said, we were all amazed at how he was asking him questions, yet confirming the answers. In other words, who's the teacher here? And then he said, well, explain to me what Iman is. Explain to me what Iman is. And he said, it is to believe in Allah, the angels, the books, the prophets, the day of judgment, and even believe in the decree, the good and the bad of it. And he said, you're right. Then he said, well, tell me about ihsan. Ihsan literally means to be good, but he actually said, to define it, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. It's to worship the Lord Almighty as if you could see Allah. For if you cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would know that He's capable of seeing you. Now, up to here, of course, I just want to get up to here. You could see that in this hadith, there are 3 different stages. Let's look at it. The first stage, it was basically emphasizing the stage of Islam. Then it went into speaking about the stage of Iman. And of course, when it talked about the stage of Islam, it was basically emphasizing a type of, yes, there's the, let's call it mental recognition, but then there is another action that you're supposed to be engaging in. So in other words, when you're talking about the level of Islam, it's more of it's more of a mental embracement that basically is affecting your behavior. But then when you look at Iman, it basically goes farther than just a mental recognition, in where it basically goes into another area of recognition. Let's look at it in where he said, for defining Iman, he said it's to believe in Allah, the angels, the books, and the messengers, etc. But wait a minute, I thought that was faith. How is that's faith? And how is it that it didn't actually put in any action? So the actions of what makes a mu'min are displayed in the Quran. What makes a mu'min, how to actually embrace Iman. Those are displayed in numerous ayat in the Quran. But what those actions that a mu'min would do, that's what it would take, that's what would take you to really coming into this level of, let's call it, heart embracement, in where it is to take you into a different vision, a vision of believing in Allah, a vision of recognizing even the world of the unseen. When we're speaking about the world of unseen, angels, books, prophets and messengers, Allah, judgment day, all of that, that's basically to tell you that this world of unseen, your heart will basically be capable of recognizing it as a conviction, that even if you couldn't see it, your heart had been so strong in its conviction, which was as a result of your commitment in action, that it gave you the ability to recognize what others would not be capable of recognizing. Yet I want you to look at here, when it came to al-ihsan, he basically said, أن تعبد الله كأنك ترى. It's to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you could see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, it was really taking us into the different stages of vision. The first stage of vision is basically the mental vision, as in the stage of Islam. The second stage of vision is basically the vision of heart vision. The third stage of vision is the spiritual vision. So that's why with this ayah, it basically said, well, there's nothing better. أسلم وجهه لله. So this is what stage? أحسن دينا ممن أسلم. So this person, this is this first stage. They basically had submitted themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as in the first stage. Then, أسلم وجهه لله, they basically had then let their own actions, their own behaviors, their own, remember when we did the hadith before, basically سمعه الذي يسمع به يبصر به, etc., all of that, basically that person, when the second stage in where they basically submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in what they're looking at, what they're hearing, what they're walking to, what they're touching, basically their recognition, their relationship with the world around them was really for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you've got the third stage, وَهُوَ مُحْسِن. And that person is the highest level of Iman. When the person practices and is, let's say, strong and has a strong conviction in doing that submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were in al-ihsan, and of course, وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, because it's not enough to place in a behavior, but you would basically have to embrace the path of Salihin. Path of Salihin, how did you get there? I thought you said that we're supposed to be just to stay away from shirk. Well, remember, I want you to take right there, وَاتَّبَعَ. The word ittaba'a actually has a shadda. Ishadda basically means a number of different things. Ishadda can actually mean a gradual thing and can also mean inward consistency. So when you look at wattaba'a, this means that the person was actually consistent in what they had a conviction to, which is in what they were embracing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But here, they were also having a conviction to follow the principle, the path of Prophet Ibrahim, which is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and of course, avoiding and leaving any type of a delusion. Why did it actually say that? And what is the context? Remember, when you look at the ayah before, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the ayah, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us, where's that ayah right there? Now, here we go. وَمَن يُشَقِّقِ الرَّسُولَ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remember that ayah? Not far from here. Let's go to it. Let's see how many ayahs are far from it. So وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. It's basically telling you, well, let me explain to you who and how embracing the truth also means that you consider yourself a part of al-mu'mineen. You consider yourself, yes, you take the Prophet, you take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the tawheed, basically as your center, the principle you replicate, you imitate the prophets and the messengers, but you also follow the path of the salihin. Why are we including the path of the salihin every single time? Because remember in Surah Al-Fatiha, what do you say? اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. And then what? صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Even in Surah Al-Fatiha, it's reminding you, okay, you're saying اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, guide us to the right path. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, the path of those that you had guided. Why are you bringing them up? It's just you now. No, it's to let you know that صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, by joining those that are in guidance, by joining those that embraced guidance, that you yourself, you're increasing the chance and the possibility of your success. You have to include yourself amongst the salihin. You have to find the environment, because it will rub on you. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you right there, I want you to take a role model. And the role model that you need to take, it's part of your own human nature that you're looking for a role model. You're looking for a hands-on, something that you could sense. So I want you to recognize that there's no better role model than Prophet Ibrahim, who was willing to sacrifice his life, willing to sacrifice his son's life, willing to sacrifice his country, basically leave his country, leave his place of basically watan, his own place where he grew up in, etc., but really in migration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was willing to leave everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what was the result? اتخذ الله إبراهيم خليلا. The result was that because he had done all the sacrifice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken Ibrahim alayhi salam as the chosen one. Al-Khalil, the chosen one, the anointed one, the one to be on top of all. And of course, we're going to get to Khalil later on, but because of time, inshallah, we will continue. We're still not done with that ayah. There's so much to actually say in regard to this ayah, because of course, you know, so many things when we're talking about spirituality, that's when you really need to cover up all those ends. So inshallah, see you all tomorrow. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. If not, I'll read this hadith. All right, I'm going to read this hadith. Let's look at this hadith. It was narrated in Sahih Muslim. When this ayah, مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ, the ayah that we did before, it basically had been such a strong ayah on the mu'mineen because they recognize every single evil thing is basically going to be something that will affect my life. So the Prophet ﷺ tells them, قاربوا وسددوا ففي كل ما يصاب به المسلم كفارة حتى النكبة ينكبها والشوكة يشاكها. What is that? The Sahaba felt that there's no way, if every single evil thing that I'm going to be doing, it's going to come back to me. So they were really مبلغا شديدا. It really affected them psychologically. So then the Prophet ﷺ told them, قاربوا وسددوا. قاربوا, it's like try to get to near perfection. سددوا, and try to get even closer to perfection for every single thing that you are inflicted with, every single thing that you are harmed with. It could be a thorn. It could be your car getting a flat tire. It could be you losing your job. It could be you're getting a flu. It could be you getting sick. It could be COVID, whatever it is. Kafara. It's basically a sin remover. It's a sin remover. حتى النكبة ينكبها. Even a calamity. You got divorced. Your husband changed on you. Their children, they're basically, they're not getting themselves in order. Your food got burned. Your cup got broken. Anything. حتى النكبة ينكبها. And the shawka, even if it's a thorn that basically pricked you, if you are patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will eliminate from the wrong deeds that you had committed. So this is just to keep you there. I don't want to leave you with thinking that, everything that I do, that's it, I'm doomed. That's what the Sahaba actually thought. They thought that they were doomed. So the Prophet ﷺ explained Islam to them. Any questions?
I just love this class. Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم ربي يحفظكم جميعا. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gather us in Jannah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us, Ya Rabbi, amongst those that are muhsineen, make us amongst those that are mu'mineen, that are basically submitting their face to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submitting all of their actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma
Ameen. Ameen.
So, inshallah, we'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow. Allah yahfazik ya Rabbi. Allahumma ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.